And now, ladies and gentlemen, one of my favorite columnists at the New York Post, but one of my favorite columnists, period, is with us, Karol Markowicz. And I met her for the first time, I forget where. And she's a fantastic thinker and writer. And one of the hardest things to do is to think smart and write in plain English. And she's able to do that. How are you?
Hi, sir. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure. You can call me Mark. Now, Joe Biden does this interview, and he says it's really horrible. We have these young trans kids passing this law in Florida. He doesn't even know what's in the law in Florida.
Right, of course.
So I would ask you, since when is parental involvement and protecting children from marauders like this abusing children?
Right. So you and I actually met in the free state of Florida, and I live here now because this is a place of sanity and normalcy, especially where kids are concerned. And the fact that the president doesn't recognize that, or I think he doesn't know what he's talking about. I think he gets talking points and just rambles on and on. But any parent would want normalcy and sanity for their children, and that's what Florida is trying to preserve for all kids.
By the way, she's written this fantastic book, Stolen Youth, How Radicals Are Erasing Innocence and Indoctrinating a Generation. This is a very thorough and very compelling book. And all you parents and grandparents out there, particularly you parents in these various organizations that go to the school board meetings and so forth, but everybody, you really need to grab a copy of this book. It's going to tell you a lot of things you think you know, but you may not know. It's that comprehensive. We're looking here, whether it's Marxism or totalitarianism, as you point out earlier in your book. Explain.
We open with a chapter on history. I was born in the Soviet Union, so the history of totalitarianism is very important to me. And my whole life in the United States, I've always been a conservative, but my whole life people have said, like, oh, doesn't this remind you of, the Soviet Union? And I'd say, no, it really doesn't. And I dismiss that completely. But our current moment in the U.S. is very reminiscent of the stories of my parents and my grandmother. I was born there, but I came to the U.S. when I was a small child. So the stories that I heard of the forced conformity and the way that you had to toe the exact correct line, and you had to say the words, and you had to say them in the right way, and you had to make a spectacle of it. You had to put the sign in your window and make sure that everybody knew that you had the right positions. I felt that in the last few years in the U.S. in a way that I've never felt before. And I think a lot of it is aimed at our children. They're trying to indoctrinate our kids, and with the kids come the adults. And all these totalitarian societies always start with destroying the family first. And that's what I'm seeing happening today in America.
And isn't it interesting, the sexualizing of kids? We used to call this unlawful. We used to call this criminal. We used to call this perversion.
Right.
And yet, look how it's being mainstreamed right now. How do they... Well, explain how they're able to do that.
I think part of it is that they use conservative outrage as a way of saying, look, the conservatives are mad at this, therefore we in the in-group of leftism support this. For example, the drag shows, right? Parents are willingly bringing their children to drag shows where these dancers are, dancing in their kids' faces. They would never bring their kids to a strip club, but for some reason, because it's a man dressed up as a woman, they are allowed to behave like a stripper in front of their small children. And it's really a mark of, because Republicans, conservatives, whatever, don't like this, therefore we're going to do it extra hard. And if you want to prove that you're with us, you're going to bring your children to this. And that's where I think that's coming from. Then we have the pornographic books in school libraries, and it's a similar concept. It's like, if the conservative prudes don't want this really graphic material in elementary school libraries, then that means we have to push it extra hard. And if anybody tries to stop us, like Governor DeSantis is doing in Florida, then we have to call them book burners and pretend that they're trying to ban books as opposed to just trying to pull pornography out of school libraries. And we trace this in our book, Stolen Youth, through so many different facets of life where kids are being targeted in this way, and it's happening all over, and parents need to learn about it and fight back.
Very important book. It's called, if you have a child or grandchild, but even if you don't, but if you do, for sure, Stolen Youth, How Radicals Are Erasing Innocence and Indoctrinating a Generation. And if they succeed, the country loses for sure. Now, You're in Florida now. You're familiar with Governor DeSantis' effort to fight so much that's going on in the culture, and he's one of the few, quite frankly. How do you think he's doing?
I think he's doing fantastic. I think he's one of the few politicians who are brave enough to take on the threats and to handle it in a very conservative fashion. I think a lot of the things he does really line up with my values. And I love that he puts kids first. That's really why we moved here when we were living in New York City and kids were just forgotten. Like during the pandemic, Governor Cuomo released a reopening plan. He had like concerts and Broadway and all the things in his reopening plan and barely mentioned schools. And I just thought we have to get our kids out of here. We have to go somewhere that they matter. And in Florida, they do matter. And it's been really wonderful. I've never lived anywhere normal before.
This book couldn't be more timely. Stolen Youth, How Radicals Are Erasing Innocence and Indoctrinating a Generation, by Bethany Mandel and Karol Markowicz. Karol Markowicz is with us. She is the brilliant columnist you've been reading in the New York Post and elsewhere. And so bad is this ideology, Karol, that they've almost destroyed the Disney company over it, yeah?
Right. Absolutely. And Disney's destroying itself. I don't know why they don't see that this path to ruin is being introduced to them by these crazy employees that they have, who are so in the minority. You know, every time Disney does anything, I hear from all of these Disney employees who just say, it's not us. We really, the majority of us here love the company the way it was, this really pro-American, very happy, childlike company, and who didn't want to push any agenda and just wanted kids to be happy and watch cute shows. And Disney is just self-destructing, and it's really hard to watch because it is a storied American company, and I think Walt Disney would not recognize the company that exists today. I actually was at Disney World a few months ago because I was speaking at a conservative conference there. And I figured, you know, it was between scandals, so I figured, okay, they've been quiet for a while. Let me take my kids and see. And the whole park, which is one of their only money-making operations, are their parks. The whole park is just ripe for woke activism. I could see it coming, like the Hall of Presidents. You know, they don't say anything bad about Donald Trump, or the Small World ride. They have all kinds of stereotypes of different cultures, which all of this is completely okay, but the woke people are not going to let them get away with this. The bathrooms have little girl pictures and little boy pictures for to know which restroom you use. You know, that's not allowed anymore. So I think Disney doesn't realize that by capitulating to these people, it's not going to end. It's not like one day they're going to be like, okay, you've reached peak wokeness and we're going to leave you alone now. They're going to keep asking for things, and that will eventually destroy the company completely.
Do you get a sense, and ladies and gentlemen, you can read all this in the book, do you get a sense that while this may have been building over time, it feels like the last 3, 4, 5 years, they've been sprinting through the culture, every aspect of the culture, burning it down?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the COVID years really sped up what was already happening. They were on a march through our institutions already, but they got so much power during COVID that I think...
By the way, that's Antonio Kremsky. Very good. A march through the institute. I love that phrase. Go ahead.
That's right.
I mean, I hate it, but you know what I mean.
Yes, that's absolutely right. And, you know, I feel like we're at a precipice where they could still be stopped, but we are so close to really being in danger of this going on for a long period of time. Again, I look back at these totalitarian societies, and I feel like they all had this moment where they could have stopped it, and they didn't, and it got so bad before it could ever get better. And I worry about the country. I worry about the children, and the way that they're being targeted, I think, is so damaging for their development. We have anxiety rates are sky high, suicide rates keep going up. All of this is related to the way that children are treated and the way that they're targeted by these people.
Have you heard many leading Democrats object to any of this? I haven't.
No. And, I have liberal friends who say to me quietly, I agree with you. I think things are crazy. I don't want my kids, hearing that they could be a boy today and a girl tomorrow. Even if they have no problem with trans adults, they don't want their kids being targeted with this thing.
Of course.
And there's so much that they, are afraid of. Or during the George Floyd riots in 2020, I was living in Brooklyn, and, everybody put up their defund police sign, their BLM signs, because just like in the Soviet Union, you have to make a spectacle out of your support. And I had friends say to me, I don't feel comfortable with this defund police thing, but I still feel like I have to emote on it. I have to put up the black square on my social media. I feel like I have to, or I'm going to maybe lose my job. And that's not crazy. People lost their jobs during COVID for all kinds of things, and among them saying really sane things like schools should open. And yet, that's why people are so scared.
And wasn't it amazing how quick we go from a republic to autocracy? I mean, and how quickly it happened in blue states and in Washington, D.C.
Right.
And it's righteous. You got to do this and you got to do that. And then the cops are arresting people for living their lives. You can go to Walmart, but you can't go to church or whatever, or synagogue.
Yes.
Shocking, no?
Right.
So quick.
Very shocking. And so much of it happened so quickly that it was terrifying. And I don't know. The thing is that I feel responsible in some ways, because before COVID, I would have said, like, oh, Andrew Cuomo, not a terrible governor, totally fine. And I didn't realize that in good times, it doesn't matter who your leader is, but it's the bad times where you're tested, and that's when it really comes down to it. I think we saw so much bad leadership during COVID. Obviously, living in Florida, I think we saw some really good leadership too. But in general, these people were terrifying, how much they enjoyed having the power over their neighbors, how much I lived in Park Slope at the time in Brooklyn, very left neighborhood. People were calling the police on each other regularly. There's too many people in each other's backyards. It was scary to see this streak in people. Again, very similar to what I always heard about the Soviet Union, that it was your neighbors turning you in. It wasn't like the police found you. It was that your neighbors turned you in, and that's what was happening in Brooklyn, too.
Well, you have to learn to be a little more like me, and that is to despise leftists even before you've met them. Isn't that funny?
I'm learning.
That's
Mark.
me.
I'm learning.
Yeah, because these people have bad intentions. That's always, well, good intention, bad idea. No. At this point, it's bad intentions. This book
Absolutely.
is fantastic. Stolen Youth: How Radicals Are Erasing Innocence and Indoctrinating a Generation. How do two people write a book? It looks like you each took a piece and did a chapter here and there. Is that right?
We divided the chapters, and it was actually a fairly easy division based on sort of what we most wanted to cover. My co-author, Bethany Mandel, is a homeschooling mom of 6. So I
Oh, my God. I've got 2 puppies here I can barely deal with. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. She also has a dog. Yeah, that's actually the craziest part. It's not so much the 6 kids she homeschools. The dog really pushes me.
Mine
so
aren't
we had a
house-trained
sort
yet.
of a natural division.
Yeah. Now, did you sort of edit each other's and make sure it kind of all fused together?
A little bit. We're both long-time writers, so it sort of worked out the way it did. I didn't really edit that much. We looked at each other's chapters to see if we wanted to continue on, something that had been started, but generally we didn't.
Well, you did a fantastic job. I really think this is a very, very important book. We talk to a lot of authors and about a lot of books here, but this is one that people should be able to relate to and actually use when they go to school board meetings and so forth, because you really peel the onion here. It's very, very important. Stolen Youth: How Radicals Are Erasing Innocence and Indoctrinating a Generation. You can jump on Amazon.com right now, or Any major bookstore should have it, but if you want it tomorrow, just jump on Amazon right now. You know, some authors get more attention than others, but this book deserves attention. And you get into all this stuff, critical race theory and what's happening to these kids and even how to push back. So I want to thank you for writing this.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. A long-time fan of yours.
Oh, thank you. It's a great pleasure. And God bless you.